In a world obsessed with filters and facades, the real power doesn't come from what we show. It comes from what we're afraid to. What if the thing that makes someone truly unforgettable isn't perfection, but the quiet, radical courage to be fully real? Carl Jung, one of the deepest thinkers of the human psyche, uncovered a truth most of us sense but rarely say out loud. We aren't drawn to people who appear flawless. We're drawn to those who feel genuine. The 7 paradoxical traits that make someone unforgettable aren't the ones we're told to chase. They're the ones we've been told to tone down, tuck away, or ignore entirely. But here's the twist. What you've been hiding might just be the most magnetic part of you. We spend so much time curating our appearance, our words, our image, that we forget the most powerful presence isn't something you perform. It's something you embody, that grounded strength, that steady calm, that rare ability to be fully present without needing to impress. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one people still feel after you've left. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to dazzle others. He wrote them to understand himself. Epictetus didn't chase approval. He mastered his inner world. And that's the real flex today. Owning your truth so fully, you stop needing permission to feel powerful. So if you've ever felt like you're too much or not enough, if you've ever been overlooked, no matter how much you gave, this might be the perspective shift you've been needing. Because we're not here to talk about charm, strategy, or aesthetics. We're here to uncover the kind of presence no one can duplicate, because it's rooted so deeply in who you are. And if something in this speaks to you, if it makes you feel seen, challenged, or just a little more at peace, then there's one small way you can be part of this space. Tap that subscribe button. Not for algorithms, but for a space that grows through truth, depth, and zero filters. Let's get into it. Let's be honest. Most of us are performing more than we realize. Not on stage, not with scripts, but in the everyday. We edit our emotions like we edit our photos. We post the smiles, even when we're running on empty. We say, "I'm fine," because it's easier than unpacking what's really going on. But here's the thing. If you perform long enough, you forget what your own truth feels like. You trade authenticity for approval. And over time, even the approval stops being enough. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But how do you know yourself? If you've spent years becoming what the world said you should be. This isn't just about social media. It's about how we shrink our opinions in conversations, how we downplay our excitement to avoid being too much. It's how we take up less space, because somewhere we learned that being fully ourselves was somehow too loud, too different, too inconvenient. But here's a truth you need to hear. Every person who's ever shifted the world was exactly that. Too loud, too real, too impossible to ignore. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents hoped for, not who your job prefers, not the version that fits best in group chats. You, the raw, unfiltered, flawed, evolving version. That's where your power is, not in the polish, but in the process." Jung built his entire framework around individuation, the process of becoming whole, by integrating all the parts of you, even the messy ones. And let's be real. Wholeness is far more compelling than perfection. Think about the people who've made a lasting impression on you. Were they the ones who seemed flawless? Or the ones who made you feel like you didn't have to be? The ones who laughed without holding back, who cried without apologizing, who owned their truth even when it was messy. They stay with us, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. And in a world drowning in pretense, real is revolutionary. Socrates once said, The unexamined life is not worth living. And part of that examination is asking yourself the hard stuff. Where am I pretending just to be accepted? If you sit with that question long enough, you'll start to find the cracks. The little places where you've swapped your truth for comfort. Those aren't flaws. They're invitations, not for judgment, but for attention. Because that's where the masks live. And when you start peeling them off, you start to feel something rare and freeing. You start to feel like yourself again. And yes, some will say it's too much, too emotional, too intense, too real. But that's exactly why it matters. Too quiet, too intense, too soft. Have you ever noticed how every version of too much is really just code for hard to control? And maybe that's exactly the point. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, taught that freedom isn't about doing whatever you feel like. It's about not being owned by the opinions, reactions, or expectations of others. And when you stop bending yourself to fit someone else's comfort zone, you begin to reclaim that freedom. You become someone who lives from the inside out, not the other way around. Plato once spoke about the shadows on the wall of a cave, illusions mistaken for reality. And the question is, how many of us are still living in that cave? Still mistaking a simplified, polished version of ourselves, the one we think is more digestible, for who we really are. But authenticity was never meant to be digestible. It's bold, it's layered, it's challenging, and it's absolutely worth it. Because something beautiful happens when you stop hiding. The people who are meant for you, not the ones who merely tolerate your light, but the ones who reflect it, start to find you. And the ones who can't meet you there, they simply fall away. Not with drama, just distance, quietly, naturally, and you learn to let them go. Because you were never meant to be a watered-down version of yourself. You were meant to be whole, fully expressed, at peace with your contradictions. Not everyone will understand, and that's okay. You don't need the world's approval. You need a few people who see you clearly and love you not despite it, but because of it. So the next time you feel yourself shrinking, performing, smoothing the edges just to make others comfortable, pause. Ask yourself, is this really me? Or is this just the version of me they'll accept? That one question can change everything. Because self-respect doesn't begin with drawing boundaries for others. It begins with telling the truth to yourself. And at the end of the day, we're not remembered for being liked by everyone. We're remembered for being real, by the ones who truly mattered. Let your presence be something people feel, not just something they look at. Let your authenticity speak louder than your appearance. Let your truth be the thing that makes you unforgettable. Growth is something almost everyone claims to want, but not everyone understands what it really requires. Real growth isn't just about consuming more content or chasing milestones. It's about letting go of the versions of you that were built for survival, without losing the core of who you are in the process. It's about evolving not because you're trying to please others, but because you're slowly aligning with your truest self. And the truth is, a lot of people confuse growth with performance. They shapeshift to fit in, not to level up. But fitting in has never been the same as belonging. One changes your outfit, the other transforms your life. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." That's the real transformation. Not trying to impress anyone with how far you've come, but quietly knowing that every step forward is one you chose. Not one you were pressured into. Not a mask you had to wear. Just you, making grounded, deliberate decisions to grow. For yourself. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." No performance, just presence. To them, growth wasn't a checklist. It was about character, about becoming someone whose inner world isn't controlled by the outside one. While others were chasing popularity or pretending to have it all figured out, the Stoics were focused on what truly lasts, the inner work, the quiet power. Because evolving doesn't mean abandoning who you are. It means refining who you are. You don't throw away your essence. You elevate it. Think of it like updating your phone. Same look, same identity, but running cleaner, faster, more aligned. That's what real growth feels like. You're not becoming someone new. You're removing the glitches. You're cleaning the outdated programming. And you're unlocking the parts of you that were always there, just waiting to be claimed. There are parts of you you've barely met, hidden strengths, quiet truths, the kind you didn't even know were there. The truth is, they've always been within you. Growth doesn't give you something new. It simply brings what's already there into the light. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. And a big part of that journey, letting go of what was never really yours to begin with. Some habits, beliefs, even versions of your identity. They were built from fear, from people-pleasing, from avoiding discomfort. They helped you survive, but they're not meant to define you forever. There comes a moment, quiet, clear, when you realize what once protected you is now keeping you small. And that's when the shift begins. Not out of pressure, not to prove anything, but because something deeper inside you knows it's time. Let's be clear. Growing doesn't mean you reject who you are now. It means you respect yourself enough not to stay stuck. That's the difference. Some fear that change means self-abandonment. But real growth isn't about running from the present. It's about honoring it so deeply you refuse to let it become your ceiling. You say, I've come this far, and I'm not done yet. That's not self-rejection. That's self-respect. Socrates believed, the unexamined life is not worth living. But it's not about judgment. It's about curiosity. When you begin to examine your life gently, honestly, you start to see the patterns, where you've grown, where you're still stuck, where you've quieted your voice just to stay in rooms that never saw you. And that kind of awareness, it changes things, because you can't transform what you're not willing to face. But once you see clearly, you get your power back. You realize you don't need permission. You don't need to hit rock bottom. You can simply begin. And yes, growth is messy. It's not all glow-ups and breakthroughs. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it's saying goodbye to people who only loved the quieter, more agreeable version of you. Let them go. You're not here to keep everyone comfortable. You're here to keep your soul awake. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Growth is the same, not one big leap, a daily choice. It's reflection over reaction, discipline over impulse, courage over comfort. And no, you won't always get it right. But the goal was never perfection. It was presence, progress, becoming the kind of person who no longer talks about evolving. Because it's already written in how you live, how you listen, how you carry yourself. You'll know you're changing when your silence says more than your explanations, when your peace is louder than your anxiety, when the triggers become teachers, and when the people you used to chase now chase clarity, because you've made it crystal clear who you are and where you're going. So if you've been waiting for a sign, here it is. You're allowed to outgrow what once felt like home. You're allowed to shift, to stretch, to shed the labels that no longer fit. Growth isn't betrayal. Growth is truth. And when that truth is rooted in your values, not your fears, it becomes something no one can take from you. You don't evolve to be loved. You evolve because you already love yourself enough to move. And that's what makes you unforgettable. Not the version of you that stayed small for acceptance, but the version of you that kept becoming, even when no one clapped, even when no one understood. Keep becoming. We've been sold an illusion that to be loved, to be respected, to be remembered, we have to be perfect. We have to hide our pain, erase our flaws, and walk around polished like armor. But here's what no one tells you, until you're too tired to fake it anymore. Perfection doesn't connect people. Struggle does. Humanity does. We don't bond over how flawless someone looks. We bond over the battles, over the moments when everything cracked. And they still got back up. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But that knowing doesn't come from studying only your strengths. It comes from owning your shadows, from standing in front of your flaws and saying, "Yes, this too is part of me, and I'm not ashamed." Shame loses power when you stop hiding, and in that light, that simple act of acceptance, you start to take your power back. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." That part of you you've been tucking away, the emotional one, the complicated one, the intense, too much, too deep version, that might actually be your superpower, the thing that sets you apart, the thing that makes someone else feel seen, or gives someone the courage to keep going. But if you bury it to make others comfortable, you rob the world of what makes you, you. We all have scars, emotional ones, mental ones, sometimes physical. And for years, we've been told to cover them, to clean it up, to soften the truth, to play it safe. But those scars, they're not signs of weakness. They're evidence of healing. They're proof that you've been through something and didn't give up. That bounce back, that resilience, that's what people remember. Not the one who never cracked, but the one who cracked and still stood. Let's go back to the Stoics for a moment. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters. You are not your failures. You are not your past. You are your response." And stories, real, powerful, unforgettable stories, they don't move people when everything goes right. They move people when the protagonist faces the fire and walks through it anyway. Socrates once said, "Be as you wish to seem, not perfect, not polished, just real." Because in the end, people aren't searching for idols. They're looking for proof. Proof that being human, fully, honestly, unapologetically human, is more than enough. Being human doesn't make you broken. It makes you real. And when you show up, flaws, fears, and all, you become something powerful. A mirror. A reflection of what's possible when someone finally stops trying to be untouchable and simply starts being honest. So pause for a moment. What's one part of your story you've been hiding? A chapter you've quietly avoided because you thought it made you less lovable, less worthy, less seen. What if that very part, the one that feels heavy or unshareable, is actually the thing that makes you unforgettable? What if the moment you're afraid to speak out loud is the moment someone else is waiting to hear, just to feel less alone? Plato believed that truth isn't only found in the world around us, it lives within us. And maybe the greatest truth we can offer is the courage to say, "Yes, I've struggled. Yes, I've fallen. And yes, I'm still here." That's not weakness. That's not shame. That's strength, choosing to take up space. That's self-respect in motion. Because the world doesn't need more filtered personas. It needs people who've walked through fire and stayed soft, who've been hurt but still show up fully, who care deeply even when it would be easier to shut down. That kind of presence, quiet, real, grounded. You don't forget it. It leaves something behind. Not noise, not flash, but feeling. And here's the truth. You don't need to apologize for who you were. That version of you was doing the best they could with what they had. You honor them not by erasing them, but by growing from them. Your evolution isn't about denial. It's about ownership, about becoming so grounded in your journey that no one can use it against you. So if you have flaws, welcome. You're human. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be present, to keep showing up, even while you're still healing. There's a quiet craving so many of us carry, to be seen, to be chosen, to feel like we matter. It starts young. We're taught to raise our hands, wait to be called on, be polite, agreeable, likable, and hope someone notices. But no one really tells us what that waiting does over time. It teaches us that worth comes from outside, that someone else has to approve before we believe in ourselves. But that's not self-worth. That's permission-seeking, dressed up as love. And here's the shift, the one that changes everything. Stop waiting to be chosen. Start choosing. Because when you do, the power comes back to you. Now, you're no longer shrinking to fit into someone else's world. You're standing tall in your own, asking calmly, does this person align with who I'm becoming? Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, said, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. And part of that learning is this. You were never meant to audition for love or belonging. You are not a product trying to earn a sale. You're a whole living person, growing, evolving, becoming. The right people won't need convincing. They won't be confused by your truth. They'll recognize it. They'll recognize you, not just as valuable, but as rare. Carl Jung taught that people often project their own unmet needs and shadows onto others. So if someone makes you feel like you have to prove your worth, chances are they're struggling to see their own. That's their work, not yours to carry. Your work is this. You are the chooser. Your space, your energy, your peace. It's yours to protect. Not everyone gets access, not because you're guarded, but because you're finally in alignment. What would your relationships look like if instead of asking, do they like me? You asked, do they meet the standard of who I'm becoming? Not the version of you chasing applause, not the one who bends to keep the peace, but the version that is steady, clear, rooted in peace, not chaos. Suddenly, life isn't about being likable. It's about being real. And from that place, something begins to shift. People respect you, not because you gave them everything, but because you know who you are. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And real, grounded power, it doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't perform. It protects what matters. It honors peace. It knows the value of stillness. When you stop chasing approval, people feel it. They feel your self-respect. They feel your boundaries. And whether they say it or not, something inside them whispers, "This person's different. I don't want to lose this." That's what makes you unforgettable. Not how loud you were, not how easy you were to please, but how whole you stayed. You didn't hand out pieces of yourself to everyone who smiled. You chose with intention. You held your truth without apology. Socrates said, "The secret to change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." So build the version of you who doesn't shrink, who doesn't beg to be chosen, who knows they are already enough, just as they are, and growing always from that truth. The right people won't make you question your worth. And the ones who do, let them go. You don't need their permission to be powerful. You only need your own. So from here on, don't measure your value by how many people want you. Measure it by how honest you're willing to be with yourself. Because when you start showing up with clarity, with intention, with calm self-respect. People feel it. But more importantly, you feel it. You walk differently. You choose differently. You're no longer waiting to be picked. You already chose yourself. And that changes everything. There's this unspoken message many of us absorb early in life. Don't feel too much. Don't speak too passionately. Don't care too deeply. Be chill. Be easy. Stay light. But if we're being honest, none of that creates real connection. It creates distance. It teaches performance. And slowly, it turns us into muted versions of who we really are. So if anyone's ever told you that you're too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too intense, I want you to hear something clearly. That's not a flaw. It's a signal. You feel deeply because you care. You express fully because you're alive. You're not too much. You're simply not easy to ignore. And that's a gift. Carl Jung believed emotions were not something to suppress, but something to understand, to integrate. He once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." That intensity you carry, it's not there to break you. It's there to wake you. And yes, it may make some people uncomfortable, but that discomfort often reveals their limits, not yours. Emotional depth doesn't make you fragile. It makes you aware. Let's talk about that awareness. Emotional sensitivity isn't weakness. It's perception. It's the reason you notice what others miss. It's why your intuition speaks louder than logic sometimes. It's how you read the silence in a room. It's why your connections go deeper, faster. Aristotle spoke of moderation as a virtue, but not in the sense of numbing your nature. He meant learning how to direct it, to feel without being consumed, to love without losing yourself. That's not chaos, that's courage. Because in a world that often rewards detachment, you choose to stay open. That's not too much, that's rare. So why do some people call you too emotional? Because real presence can't be controlled. It asks questions. It listens closely. It invites truth. And for those hiding behind masks, that kind of honesty feels threatening. Your passion disrupts their indifference. Your vulnerability challenges their armor. Your truth makes their denial harder to hold. And rather than meet you where you are, they label you as too much, too intense, too dramatic, too complicated. But that's not truth. That's projection. Even the Stoics, masters of discipline, never told us to suppress emotion. They told us to understand it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That includes your emotional world. You don't need to silence it. You just need to listen to it, and then decide how to respond. That's not indulgence. That's maturity. Socrates said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." And knowing yourself includes knowing how deeply you feel and choosing not to shame yourself for it. Your sensitivity isn't a liability. It's your radar for truth. It's why others feel seen around you in ways they've never felt before. It's what allows you to care when it would be easier to check out. It's what makes you stay when others run. It's not too much. It's real. You're not difficult. You're just unwilling to live on the surface. You're not dramatic. You're just unwilling to pretend you don't care. And in a world that teaches people to shut down, you're choosing to stay open. That's not fragility. That's strength. And it's unforgettable. So next time someone tells you, "You're too much," take a breath. Look them in the eye. And without defensiveness, without fear, think to yourself, then maybe they're just not ready for depth. Because you're not here to shrink for someone else's comfort. You're here to expand into the full, emotional, alive version of yourself. And the people who are meant for you, they'll never ask you to shrink. They'll rise to meet you. They'll celebrate your passion, not shy away from it. People who feel deeply love deeply. And people who love deeply, they change lives. So don't dilute that. Don't apologize for your volume, your vision, or your voice. Be all of you. Be open. Be expressive. Be grounded. Not for attention, but for truth. Because at the end of the day, you won't be remembered for how easy you were to be around. You'll be remembered for how real you were willing to be. There's a quiet strength that shows up the moment someone realizes they deserve more. Not in a loud or defiant way, but in the calm, grounded presence of someone who's no longer willing to settle. It's not dramatic. It's not reactive. It's just a shift inward. And suddenly, the old patterns, they lose their grip. The one-sided relationships, the draining conversations, the pretending, they stop. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Once you recognize your worth, the need to chase fades. The urge to prove dissolves. You stop accepting crumbs and start holding space for something real. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, once said, "Never value anything as profitable to yourself which shall compel you to break your promise, lose your self-respect, or hate another person." In other words, if something costs your integrity, it's already too expensive. People who understand that, who learn to walk away without drama, without burning bridges, they carry a kind of quiet power. Not because they're cold, but because they're clear. They can't be guilted. They don't stay where their peace is constantly at risk. Here's something to notice. Most people aren't afraid of losing someone who needs them. They're afraid of losing someone who doesn't, but chose them. There's a difference. When you start paying attention to what lifts your energy and what drains it, you stop making decisions out of loneliness. You start making them from self-respect. And that changes everything. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But that's also where real connection begins. When you no longer need others to validate you, because you've already accepted yourself. When you stop performing for love, you begin to receive love for who you actually are. That version of you, grounded, whole, self-respecting, is the one others don't want to lose. Because it's stabilizing. It's real. Let's talk boundaries. Not as walls, but as filters. They're not about pushing people away. They're about letting the right ones in. A boundary simply says, here's what supports me. Here's what doesn't. It's not about rejection. It's about alignment. That kind of clarity protects your peace. It keeps your energy from being in constant recovery mode, healing from things that should have never crossed your threshold in the first place. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." So if you're tired of being overlooked, of being drained, maybe it's not about fixing the people who can't meet you. Maybe it's about building a new way of showing up, one that doesn't bend for approval, because peace that costs your self-worth is just self-abandonment in disguise. Knowing what you deserve doesn't make you arrogant. It just means you finally stop thinking you're less. And that shift, it touches everything. The way you speak, the way you love, the way you choose. You stop accepting half-truths, half-effort, half-presence. You don't demand perfection, but you do require honesty. You don't beg for love. You recognize it when it's real. You stop asking, "Am I asking for too much?" And you start asking, "Why was I ever settling for so little?" Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. So let self-respect become a habit. Let choosing your peace become your default. The world will adjust. The wrong people will drift. The right ones, they'll show up and stay. Now let's talk about love. There's a version of love that feels heavy, like pressure, like weight. It whispers, "Don't leave me. I need you to be okay." It's not always ill-intentioned, but it's not healthy either. Because love that comes from emptiness isn't love, it's survival. When love becomes a transaction, here's my brokenness, please fix me, it exhausts both people involved. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And yet, that's where genuine love begins. Because when you accept yourself fully, your love stops being a plea. It becomes a gift. You're no longer handing people your unhealed wounds, hoping they'll rescue you. You're whole. And love from someone who is whole feels different. It's lighter. It uplifts. It doesn't pull. It doesn't beg. It chooses, again and again, freely. So many confuse intensity with connection. They think the ache, the clinging, the fear of loss is love. But real love is rooted in freedom. Not fear, not dependency, not need. It says, I'm here, not because I'm afraid to lose you, but because I want to be. That's rare. The Stoics taught that our peace should never be tied to things outside of our control. And Epictetus reminded us, only the educated are free, emotionally educated, self-aware, whole. When you've done the work, when you've learned to fill your own cup, you stop chasing love. You radiate it, and that kind of love, it doesn't demand, it inspires. Think about it. When someone walks into a room with calm presence, with joy that isn't performative, you feel it. That's what makes someone unforgettable. Not their need, but their wholeness. You don't get that from someone who's starving for validation. You get it from someone who already knows who they are and chooses to give, not from emptiness, but from overflow. Socrates once said, "The hottest love has the coldest end." That kind of love often begins in urgency, in obsession, in the hope that someone else can quiet what we haven't yet healed in ourselves. But there's a different kind of love, one that doesn't start from emptiness, but from fullness. It flows from a life you've built, peace you've earned, joy you've found in your own stillness. That love doesn't burn out. It evolves. It breathes. It doesn't collapse under pressure. Because it was never trying to be rescued. It was simply offering presence. That's why it's so important to tend to yourself first, not later, not when the right person shows up. Now, because if your cup is empty, every connection becomes an unconscious search for something only you can give. But when your cup is full, when you've spent time healing, learning, grounding, you give from abundance. You love without draining yourself. And the people who belong close to you, they won't be there to consume you. They'll honor the abundance. They'll bring their own. Aristotle believed the highest form of love wasn't romantic, but virtuous friendship. A kind of bond where both people are committed not just to each other, but to growth, to seeking the good within and between them. That kind of love doesn't cling. It doesn't try to control. It expands. It strengthens. And it only shows up when you've done the work of becoming whole before you arrive. So ask yourself gently, am I giving love from a wound or from wisdom? Am I reaching from fear or extending from freedom? Because love shouldn't feel like a lifeline. It should feel like light, a steady presence, not a desperate plea. You don't need someone to complete you. You need someone who complements the fullness you've already worked for, the wholeness you've fought to reclaim. That's the kind of energy people don't forget, not because it's loud, but because it's real. Take care of yourself first, not as a strategy, but as a truth. Nourish your soul, know your worth. Then when you love, let it be a reflection of that wholeness, not an attempt to fill a space. The right people, they won't just stay. They'll protect that light because they'll recognize what they've found, and you will too. The most unforgettable energy you'll ever carry is the quiet knowing that you are whole, without needing to prove, perform, or chase. And when you choose yourself first, the people who are meant for you won't ask you to shrink. They'll grow with you. If something in this stirred something within you, there's another message waiting, one that will take you deeper. You'll find it right here on the screen. Thank you for being here and for being a part of this space, not just of philosophy, but of becoming, slowly, intentionally, and powerfully. And remember, the journey continues. We'll be here whenever you're ready for the next step.